This is John Morrison. He's Director of Blackboard Beyond User Communities at Blackboard. He doesn't work for us, he works for Blackboard. So he's going to be talking a little bit about the Scholar tools and also about SafeAssign. And I guess we can probably bring up anything else we want about Blackboard as well, and you can try to field that if you can.
That may be asking. That may be asking a lot. That may be asking a lot.
All right.
So what I'm trying to do today, my job is basically to go out and work with institutions and help sort of introduce this stuff, connect them to it, make it valuable, make it, etc. So what I've got is the first two things that our group has done, which is Scholar and SafeAssign. And since we've recently just announced something else called Sync, which is really about sort of Facebook integration with the academic suite. Since that only just got announced last week, I'm really not going to go into that. It's not actually available yet. But what I want to do is give you an idea, since we've been working with institutions to get this stuff going, as well as gaining a lot of experience ourselves, obviously, to try and sort of give you the benefit of a lot of that and make this a lot easier, whichever one it is that most interests you. So I've got Scholar, which is sort of a resource network, which is basically about sharing resources across campus and also about sharing across institutions as well. And then SafeAssign, which is a piece of anti-plagiarism software, which is really about doing matches with work that's submitted against students against a series of databases which contain all sorts of other things, and I'll get into what that is. So that's sort of very sort of high level of what I'm looking at doing. So I guess the first question for you is, what are your sort of interests and needs, and do you have any questions that either related to Scholar or related to SafeAssign, and do you have a preference for which you'd like me to focus more on? So just to sort of scratch your brains and have a think for a second, because I can be quite flexible and adjust. I've done this a fair few times, so
I'm here because of the SafeAssign.
Okay.
Yeah. I've never used Turnitin.
Okay.
I was always kind of nervous to do it, and now this new tool kind of came up, so I was interested to see what it was like and what it will help me with.
Okay, so SafeAssign is your main interest, yeah? You same thing?
Mine also.
Okay. Same? Do you have...
I'm with OIT.
Okay. All right. Can I do a very brief bit on Scholar, just to give you a quick sprint through? Because I think it's kind of... The challenges are sort of different with each of these products. SafeAssign is actually very easy to use. In fact, you can very quickly, just through sort of clicking on mice, the ones with long tails connected to the computer, you actually get quite a way and do a lot. It needs a little bit of, the things I'll point out is a little bit of point about interpreting and making sense of it all, which needs a little bit of thought. Scholar's sort of the reverse. It's a little bit of a challenge for people to get hold of the concept, and also needs a little bit of messing around to get used to the idea before it tends to take with people. It's quite a valuable tool, and it's a steadily growing network, but it's not as intuitive as SafeAssign is for most people, so that's sort of the challenges there. So I'm going to do a sort of sprint through Scholar then, and then I'll try and then do SafeAssign, and I'll stop for, so we're a small group, so jump in if you have questions, or at the end you can ask anything that it's not related. So really what Scholar is, I said it's a resource sharing network, and is that visible at the back? Okay. There's two sort of general challenges that people have. Firstly, getting the ideas behind the tool and sort of understanding what they're about. And secondly is a little bit of experience in learning to use the tool. Now, so once people have crossed these two bridges, they tend to go, oh, I can do this and this and this with it. And that's usually the point I know, yes, they've got it. And same on campus, people who are leading implementationists will find this. Once people sort of tend to interact back with them, it's usually the check that you know people have got the ideas. So really what it is, it's an extension to the Blackboard family. It's what's called a building block or a power link if you're using one of the Vista CE families. It's free. All the accounts that get created on it are also free, and they're actually lifelong accounts as well. Because even if you move to another institution, or as a student, if you moved on, left the institution, you can still access all your data and everything at www.scholar.com. So it's the beginnings of a sort of lifelong learning resource network is what it's really trying to do. And if it helps if I go the other way. Now, I've used the word resource, so what we actually mean by resource is anything with a web address. Doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's a website page, article in a library database, video, anything, as long as it's got a URL. That's the key aspect of it. So we're looking at managing and building resources that are web-based. And if you want to try and grab the one idea that's sort of behind the one concept, it's about academic resource sharing across courses. So basically, as a user, you get to manage resources across the series of courses that you have. You also get to interact and use resources from others at other institutions, because everybody in the network is a student, a faculty member, or a staff member at an educational institution, because you can only create accounts on the system via the learning management system. Okay, so that's how we know who everybody is. So it's a semi sort of closed network. As I mentioned, you can take stuff with you afterwards because it resides on this separate website as well as being integrated into your learning management system. So that's where the idea is the beginnings of a lifelong learning management system come in. Just to give you a crude idea, it's about 70, it's actually 750 something or other now, and 35 or 30 or so, 40% are test instances. It's installed around the world, but obviously heavily US focused, simply because of the size. So a lot of peers at different institutions are on here already. 42, 44,000 users, something like that, 62, 65,000 plus bookmarks. So it's been growing slowly but steadily, and particularly in this last academic year, quite a slow takeoff, and now we're starting to see increase in usage. The thing about networks is they become more valuable the more people are on them. So they get progressively better and better. So that's what we're starting to see the beginnings of that curve with Scholar. To give you an idea, there's all sorts of resources that get copied a lot by people. And two of the areas you do see stuff that gets copied and shared around an awful lot is writing process resources and also multimedia resources in the different health disciplines, nursing, radiology, et cetera, They tend to do like little clips of video which show things, images, and a variety of other sort of video and other things that basically are very descriptive and useful in the health disciplines. So that's particularly high points we've seen of a lot of activity in those two areas. We've also seen there's some disciplines that have got quite a lot of bookmarks, biology, geography, and politics come to mind. Most disciplines have got something at this point in terms of resources, but there's a variety of, depends on the number of users we've got in each discipline. So they're all slowly yet steadily building up. As well as having resources, you can also find people on the system, people who basically have large resource collections. So here's just a quick three to give you an idea. And the thing that you see on Scholar is actually the public username, which is the first bit. The rest of this you don't see. This is some information that is private unless the individual chooses to share it. So McLeod G is Stuart McLeod at William Patterson in New Jersey. He's got lots of resources to do with modern US history. Michael Page at Emory has got a large number of geography resources. And Lucy Pinckney in the UK has got a lot of resources to do with the learning side of educational technology, less technology, much more learning focused. So there's three individuals who've used the system a lot, and as well as being able to sort of track topics and subject resources, you can actually track these people. So literally what you can do is keep a stream, and every time they add something, you get to see what they've added. So if you have somebody else out there in your field that's doing something similar to you, it's quite a valuable tool. And that little search stream that you create and just leave running, it just keeps running permanently, gathering stuff as it's added. So some of the other things we've seen people do, sharing across school districts, K-12 teachers in particular tend to share a lot of curriculum and interact a lot around curriculum. We've seen people sharing with those outside the institution. So if you have a community mandate or you're working on a project with the community and those users won't have access to your system, they can still access those resources via www.scholar.com, even though they don't have accounts on the system. The way you can do that is you can share that via what's called RSS, which is basically a sort of format for pushing resources out to people, notifications to resources, to people's email accounts. I've already mentioned we've had system-wide resource sharing in the health discipline area around multimedia resources. So that's sort of the positive side. Now sort of somewhat of the slightly negative, more challenges around Scholar. Users do need to get the idea behind Scholar. This is not something that's necessarily intuitive to people. For those that might have been involved in online courses in the very, very early days, you had to sort of go around in the mid-90s and explain what an online course was. I probably wouldn't have to do that if I was starting an institution now going around. People would go, yeah, we know what an online course is, get down to the details of it. But we're sort of going back and doing some of this big picture stuff because we're still finding people having a challenge getting hold of the idea. You do need to use it a little bit in order to sort of reinforce and for it to make sense. We've noticed a difference between places where we've done some sort of communication training and those that haven't. Where not much goes on in terms of communication or training, we tend to see not many resources getting added. There's not much use of the system. It's almost people create accounts and they go, what next? I don't know what to do. So that's one of the small challenges we've seen. There is actually nicely a way around that, and I've got some resources I can point you to that'll help you, things that you can push out to your users that'll help get you around that problem. So drilling down, there's two sorts of things that are going on in Scholar. Firstly, by default, everybody gets an individual account to manage their own resources, so they can build and manage those resources throughout the career. At a second point, within a specific class, an instructor can choose to turn on a course section of Scholar to allow sort of course sharing. Now that course sharing is also happening within a broader sharing range of all the resources that are on Scholar, but it guarantees everybody gets to exactly the same page, has the same start page, sees exactly the same thing. So it's a little bit more controlled version of this, and it's a way of sort of pushing things out and having a slightly more instructor-led approach towards using these types of tools, which is also a great way in terms of training and bringing and inculcating students into using these tools appropriately. So we found that to be quite successful that way. The very big idea, why would you use something like this as an individual? It's really several things. Firstly, keeping track of your resources, being able to organize them for easy retrieval. If you go back to sort of the idea of standalone PCs, everybody, you probably have a PC or that you use at work and something that you use at home and perhaps something you use in a third place in a lab. Well, if you've got bookmarks in those browsers, you've got 3 separate sets of bookmarks. So this is a way about having your resources on one system that's web accessible from wherever you are. Those resources are always there, and they're always accessible from within your courses as well. So you can keep track of, as well as being able to firstly organize, second, you can actually keep track of resources added by everybody else on the system. And that's people at every institution, faculty, staff, students, and you can restrict it to just faculty if that's really who you only want to see. If you're a biology instructor and you really don't want to see what students are adding, but you are interested in what other biology instructors are adding, you can just view that as well. And so you might do that for the whole of the topic of biology, subject of biology, or perhaps you might focus on one particular topic in biology, or one or two that's of real interest to you. As I said, I've mentioned these sort of experts on the system. You can find these people and keep track of their resources. But the really useful thing is you can actually start to reuse all these resources. Anytime you do anything in Scholar, whether it's for an individual or for a course purpose, with 1 or 2 clicks of a mouse, you can copy and move it from individual to class accounts. You can repurpose it for any subsequent course that you teach. So it's a very flexible, very easy to use system. So in terms of a sort of simple mini curriculum, in terms of an institutional level, sort of 4 things to think about in terms of communication and training around this. The first is that people do need to create a Scholar account. The reason that that happens is so, firstly, they can access via www.scholar.com. So that's the username and password. It also means if they did move on to another institution, perhaps an undergrad student goes on to grad school somewhere else, and that place also has Scholar, they can reassociate their account to that institution and access it through that LMS. So that's the 2 reasons that we did that. So users do have to create a Scholar account. They can change the password themselves, but they should really try and pick a username that makes sense and they're going to live with for a long, long time. And really not a good idea to use social insurance numbers for usernames. The number of times we have to change that is quite significant. Now, secondly, there's a little browser button, which I'll show you in a minute, which allows you very rapidly bring resources from anywhere on the web into Scholar. It makes quite a difference. It's a lot more laborious to use without that. Once you get that tool and you've used it a few times, you can actually put something from anywhere you're working on the web, any sort of resource you're looking at, within 15 seconds, you can have it dumped and categorized in Scholar. If you haven't got that, it takes a sort of minute or more to laboriously copy and paste between the web page and into Scholar. Once you've got these 2 things, you've done the setup portion. Now there's 2 tasks in terms of being able to use the system. Firstly, being able to add a resource or a bookmark, and secondly is to add a stream. And a stream is a saved search that's just continually running for you. So it's something you set up on your Scholar account and you're able to, it'll catch those resources for you. So that's just sort of mini curriculum. Once individuals have got those 4 things sorted out, we find they tend to use the system a fair bit and they keep using it. It's a challenge until they've got those 4 things squared away. And to give you a very brief sort of idea of what this looks like, let's imagine we're a hypothetical student in an introductory class in perhaps biology, perhaps something else related to that, and has found a resource to do with pollution in the oceans. What they do is they have this Scholar button that you have to go install in your browser. It's a one-time event just to go and get it set up in your browser. But once you've done that, what it means is once you drag it, you can pull this information. These first 2 lines get automatically pulled in to Scholar, which is basically whatever the page name is and whatever the URL location the page is. And if you drag a mouse over the page just before you click on that button, it'll pull whatever text that you dragged a mouse over into a description of the field. So if there's a good sort of summary at the top of the page that tells you what the resource is, drag a mouse over it, and then it comes. And you can edit this very easily. As soon as it's in, it's just editable text. So the only thing you really have to go and do beyond that is actually add some tags. And usually what I do is suggest people start with the idea of get used to adding 3 to 5 tags. Good rule of thumb. It gets you starting to describe the resource in some sort of detail. And what tags are is they're basically user-assigned terms. It's whatever the user thinks is the most intelligent way to classify and organize this resource for themselves. And that's the way to start thinking about it. And they're simply terms that are separated by spaces. If you want to have a multi-word tag, all you do is stick a pair of quotes around it. So that's how you have a multi-word tag. Now, what tends to happen, now anyone who's a librarian or has worked a lot with librarians often has some sort of concerns around this, which is to do with the fact that this system looks somewhat disorganized and potentially chaotic. Well, what happens is users tend to use these systems, their terms for classifying and organizing get more sophisticated, they get better, they naturally start to approach what we might consider to be a sort of taxonomic system that we have in disciplines or that we have in library systems. So it really is less of a concern in the long term, which is what these tools are about. The longer term tools are building and managing resource collections. So users tend to self-correct as they use the system more, as they start to realize there are better terms out there and they actually start to change and modify their terms. So you can actually go bolt through and change. If I found this word ocean, if I was to find, for example, that everybody else was using the term sea, I could go through once I realized that and just do a complete rename of all my ocean tags to sea. And I would be instantly connected with all those other terms that had to use the word sea in them. But that's my choice as an individual. These things, so that's really the parts of this that are sort of the guts. These 2 things are absolutely essential. Resource doesn't share without it. Description and tag are really necessary. And half the reason you're adding a description, half of it is for yourself, so that you remember in 6 months' time what this was about and why you saved it. But the other reason you're doing it is for this sort of social purpose, so that somebody else can see, oh, that's what this resource is. Yes, that interests me. I want to go look at it. Or, no, I sort of have an idea of that area. I don't need to. Now I see what this is. So you're doing this half for yourself and half for other people out there. These things down the bottom here are really optional. You can add a discipline tag if you want. It's basically a drop-down list of a couple hundred disciplines. You can add a course tag, which is basically a tag that's unique to your course. So the only people that see that once you have that tag is members of that course. All right, so all these other things up here by default are public. This actual one is private. So it can be useful in some circumstances, but it can also cause you a couple of restrictions. So it's worth thinking about. Once you start using this in conjunction with any of these other things, what happens is everybody else sees all these public things. They just don't see this if they're not a member of the course. And lastly, resources, everything is public unless you choose to make it private. So that's the default on the system. You are sharing everything that you do, everything that you save. It's shareable, searchable, findable by everybody else. So that's what's involved. Now, this is a lot laborious and a long way around through it. First time I've perhaps walked you through this, it's taken us probably a minute or 2. Once you've done this a couple of times, I said with that Scholar button, it takes about 15 seconds. So you can really very quickly bring any sort of web-based article, any web-based resource that you find that's useful, that you want to be able to find again, or you want to share with somebody else, you can bring it rapidly into this system. So this is what Scholar looks like within the course management system. You probably it's somewhat blurry, I appreciate from the back, but you've got 2 sets of things here. You've got these boxes with the green lines on the top, and you've got this box over here on the right with a series of text terms. These are what's called the streams. So these are the saved searches. So this individual has got one for My Bookmarks, which is their own. They've got one for News in Oceanography, and lastly, they've got one for Biology 220 student resources. So that's what this individual has chosen to save on their page. And then over on the right here, we've got a tag cloud. So let's go and have a look at the, so this is kind of the home page view, the sort of first level. every time I do a search or I click on anything here, I'm going to get into a more detailed view. So what I get when I get that view, I get the details of the particular search or the particular stream I'm looking at. Either way, it'll look the same. And then I've got a tag cloud over here. It's always telling me at the top what I'm looking at. So I'm looking at my bookmarks. I'm looking at my tag cloud. And then what happens is I jump down and I click on these terms in the tag cloud. You can probably now read this in the back, hopefully. You see there's different size. And basically, the larger they are, the more resources that are shared underneath it. So size is simply an indicator of number of resources. So what happens when I click on a particular tag, the word ocean, I'm now looking at my bookmarks tagged ocean, still looking at my own tag cloud. I've got 9 resources. I can see some people have written a description underneath. I've got the link to the resource. I can see the tags that were used, the discipline tag and the course tag. And I can click and drill down into the system based on any of those things. So I could decide I want to pull up all oceanography resources, or I could decide that I want to look at just resources that have been tagged pollution. And any of these resources, these at the moment I'm looking at just mine. I've got the ability to edit them, email them to somebody else, or delete them with one click of a button. So the big thing that now changes is I'm going to click on this button that's called All. I've got the button Mine that's highlighted. So once I do that, I now jump from click to 26 resources, and I'm looking at all bookmarks tagged with the word ocean. So I've gone from 9 to 26 resources. So now I'm looking at a lot more resources than I was before. So that's literally how your own resources are integrated with everybody else's. They're really using the same sort of organization pattern, but now I'm looking at the recent tag cloud, which is actually all tags. So we use the word recent because the all tag cloud is just too large to display at a time. But I can see up here I am looking at all bookmarks. So once I do that, I've got the ability, once I find some other resources that somebody else has put in here, I can copy them to my own account, email them to anybody else. And if I think there's something really inappropriate about the resource, you can click on that button and report it to our team. If you do that, try and tell us what it is that is the problem with the page. It isn't always obvious to us when we go and look at resources. Most of the time what we find is actually it becomes a sort of borderline case. I had one of a high school teacher complaining about some resources about beer. They were actually put up by a biochemist in a university program, and they were seriously technical articles. I mean, any high school student who could have understood those really was welcome to them. They were incredibly complex, a lot of chemical formula. Yes, they had the word beer in the title, but that's not really what they were about. So, but we get into a variety of those discussions, and that's absolutely fine. We've got no concern about that. Usually they self-resolve most of the time. So that gives you a little bit idea of how resources are organized in Scholar. The next point I was just going to make the fact that there is this course section as well. And really what I'm going to skip over really the idea behind the course section is this idea of having a little bit more control. So really it's exactly the same as the individual Scholar section, except it's not turned on by default. The instructor in the course has to click a button to choose it on, turn it on, and that's called registering when you're actually in the system. But really what it allows you to do as an instructor is to sort of push things out in a little bit more organized fashion, a little bit more structured, and actually start to get students to collect resources for your course. So you actually get to build up a resource collection over time. And one of the first things I tend to suggest is that people do, after the fact you register, is actually load one or more bookmarks with all the key tags that you want to use. Those are probably either the main topics in your course, or they're alternatively some of the main terms in your discipline that you also want students to use and think about. So what happens when you do that, you end up with, actually let me go back here a second, you end up with a course tag cloud as opposed, when you log into course, you have a course tag cloud, and the first thing students see when they first hit that is the 4 or 5 or a dozen terms that you've stuck in there. And if you actually write those into the bookmark name itself as well as writing them to the tag cloud, it's very obvious to students, please start using these terms. You can obviously send them an email or talk to them as well and say, start using these terms. It'll get you connected, get your resources connected. It also solves the problem of students making initial spelling mistakes and other sorts of things that can happen. So it's a bit more directive way of using these tools, and it's also course-based, so you start off in a bit of a smaller universe than you do in this mass universe of everybody at all the institutions who are out here using this tool. And it's been quite successful in institutions that have tried this approach in terms of bringing students on and getting them used to using these tools. It's also a great way to get students to go out and collect resources for you, because you can set simple assignments like, go collect half a dozen or a dozen resources which either summarize a topic, or half a dozen for and half a dozen resources against a particular topic. And in that description field, what you then do is you ask them to sort of summarize that, because you can write a couple paragraphs in here. This will take quite a lot of text. So you can ask them to justify their choice or to answer the question that you set them in collecting resources. You can do a whole variety of things. So you get students to interact with resources in a bit more of a in-depth way than they might, they might start to do without so much direction, particularly when they're using web-based resources. So that's a valuable tool for collecting, building up course resources. So these are the 4 things. First, you've got a registry you have to turn on, load 1 or more bookmarks, so you push out the key tags you want to use. And lastly, what the instructor gets to do. The instructor is the only one who can add and delete those streams on the front page of a course section. So the Scholar course section looks identical, but the only one difference is the students aren't able to add or delete those streams. Every time they add a resource that's caught by one of those streams that is relevant, the stream will catch it and display it. But the students just can't mess around with the structure of your Scholar course site. That's under your control. So that's an example of what the sort of thing I might set up if I was starting an introductory biology course. I'd load all those into the tagline. I'd also load them into the bookmark name sort of field, so they displayed very visually in terms of the bookmark name itself. So that's what a Scholar course site looks like. It is really identical. It works exactly the same way as the individual site. The only difference is you as the instructor are the only one who has these X buttons to get rid of these streams or to add more. Students don't have control of them. Now the other odd thing for you as an instructor is you have every time a stream is created on any course that you teach, as well as all the individual streams that you might create on your own individual account, they are all saved under your account. So what happens under the advanced search button here, all your previous ones are saved, and you can also access them via this add a stream button every time you click on this. So if you're teaching the same course again next semester, or you're teaching a follow-on course where it would be good to have some resources from the previous course, you can go and add those streams from those other courses very quickly to any course you subsequently teach. So that's just really 3 sets of things. Firstly, it's a personal knowledge management tool. Secondly, you've got the class tool, the Scholar course tool. And thirdly, by the way that you use the site, if you get students using the thing to build resource collections for it, you can really start pushing this towards being a bit more of a learner-centered tool. So that's really what I've got in terms of giving you Scholar. And that's the sort of stuff it takes a little bit of training and so on to get people to know. One of the ways we go around doing this is doing sessions like this, or doing webinars for elite groups and institutions to try and get them into the idea. We have some screencasts now that are up on the wiki. We have all sorts of resources you can reuse, copy. They're completely open. With some people have gone and done training on campus, or alternative, they put out some communication materials. We've got some sample welcome letters. There's some up on the site, and I've got a new one that I did recently that I think is better than some of the earlier ones that we did. At the end of the semester or end of a given period of time, it's worthwhile having a look at how things have gone. And you can also ask us for reports, so we can provide you an institutional level report, number of users, number of stuff saved, give you an idea of what's happening. You may have some thoughts that such and such has happened, and we can give you a report that will confirm or allow you to sort of understand what's happened in a bit more depth. So that's Scholar. It's a lot longer. It's a bit of a challenge. People don't naturally, a lot of people don't naturally think about sharing resources, I think, particularly in higher education, I think particularly for students, unless there's perhaps some structure or some push to do that as part of a course. But so the growth of these systems is a lot slower than something like SafeAssign, which we're about to jump now. And the challenge with this is half getting the idea, and then secondly starting to use those tools so users start to see the value and find value out of it. Once users go create a stream, you have a particular favorite subject or a topic that interests you, and you start to collect resources from others. There's a light goes on, oh, you mean, wow, I leave this thing running and all of a sudden I get resources just turn up next time I log on? That's interesting. Particularly if there's somebody else out there who really is quite capable in your field. Really, it's a way of getting other people to do work for you, which is really what a lot of these tools are all about. Small couple points, the registration, the building block, same thing with safe assign, can be a little bit tricky. Not that you've had any problems at all. He said.
We're set for now.
The other thing I try and encourage is people to install the Scholar Bookmarklet. If you can talk to your IT team and get them to put that in, you're installing labs and faculty and staff images, it makes the thing a lot easier to use. Installing little things on browsers is not something that everybody does. You know, people who obviously use computers a lot, that's not a challenge, but that's not everybody. I'll just skip over those. There is actually a profile thing we rolled out at the end of last year which adds some social networking capabilities. By default, everything is private. The only thing it shows about you is your Scholar username. So if you want people to actually be able to find you, you have to actually click on the edit button in these sections and then change the setting under here that says private, make it to Scholar users only or public to actually show information. So if you're not finding people, it's probably because they haven't released that information about themselves. All right, so that's, I'm going to jump over Scholar and jump to Safe Assign. Oh, that was the other thing I did mention. We did announce the sync thing, but it's not actually out till end of the month. Well, the first part of it isn't out at the end of the month, so I'm going to skip that. All right, so what I'm going to do, anyone got any questions about Scholar before I jump on to Safe Assign? All right, pleased. Okay, so Safe Assign is a bit of a different beast. The idea of sort of plagiarism checking and checking things that students submit against databases is really fairly clear. The tool actually is very simple to use. There's not an awful lot to it, either from a structure or from a student perspective. It's really very much like the assignment tool you're already used to using, probably within Blackboard. It visually looks and works in a very, very similar way. So the challenge is less about learning to use the tool than it is actually sort of interpreting and understanding some of the things that happen. And like most things in life, there generally is a reason for them. We just may or may not know that reason. So, truly what Safe Assign is about is a piece of plagiarism detection software. But I can make statements like this, but the really key thing at the bottom of the line is to say it's a matching tool. It takes things it's given and matches them against a series of databases and then shows you what those matches are. And it's worth sort of, the reason I pause for a second after making that statement is that's going to answer a whole series of other questions as we come through, and I'll point out why that's the answer to all sorts of questions. So that's what it's doing, it's matching. So some of the times what I need to do is sort of show some of the challenges, issues, and limitations around that. But really it is this idea of trying to uncover plagiarism by comparing against a large number of other resources. So what you get is you get a dedicated, it's a separate assignment tool within the Blackboard system when you go and create. Basically, you click on the same drop down on the top right when you're in edit view, and you'll have a tool that now says Safe Assign on it. Which once papers get submitted, it gets checked against the algorithm that we have, which then leads to an originality report being thrown back to you that you're able to see. You can choose to make the reports viewable to students. That's up to you as you set up something. We've also added a global reference database. So two big differences between us and Turnitin, if you'd be looking at that. Firstly, it's a cost issue. This is a free when you have the Blackboard enterprise license. Secondly, we have an opt-in global database. So students actually have to choose to submit to this. Cross-institutional database is what I mean by global. And at the admin level, you actually have the ability to disable that if you choose to do that. One of the decisions worthwhile making up front, once you disable it, any assignment that existed during that period when it's disabled can never have a global reference database. So usually it takes a little bit of thinking about. And lastly, we've got gradebook integration, which is now available in Vista Cs. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
You can.
I'm a little confused. It's matching against billions of sources.
I'll show you.
We're going to tell the students that they can opt out not to have it matched to anything?
No. So there's two sets of databases. That's a great question. Thank you. There's an institutional database. By default gets created when Safe Assign gets created. Everything a student does gets submitted into that. So that's UMBC's institutional database. They'll be compared against everything at your institution. Yes. So that happens. That happens automatically. As an optional added option, we have this cross-institutional database that students can choose and actually have to click on. They've read a little statement saying, I am choosing to do this in order to do this. We find it's around somewhere, varies from 30 to 40% of students that actually choose to do that. Just to give you an idea. No, you cannot make them put them in the cross-institutional database. No.
So how is this helpful?
Well, so there's institutional database and there's a cross-institutional database.
Right.
So their paper does go into the institutional database. They don't have any choice about that. So we'll get compared against the 4 sets of sources, one of which is your own previous institutional submissions. And I'll show you what the other 3 are in a minute.
But it's more than just the institutional.
Yes, I'll show you. So I'll get there. This might be part of the answer to your question.
Yeah,
Same question?
So
All right.
So just to take this a little bit further.
Yep.
They could have plagiarized a paper from another institution, but we wouldn't have any way of knowing that because it wouldn't be in the global reference database.
If that paper is web accessible and exists via the web search that I'll show you, that how we collect stuff via web searches, you'd catch it that way.
But if they had a friend who went to American University and their
As long
friend
as
had
that
to write a history paper.
Oh, sorry. If the friend has put it in, checked it into the global reference database of their institution, it's in there. Your student submits something, it gets matched against that. But their paper doesn't get submitted into the global reference database unless they choose to.
American U decided not to do it.
Right.
Because they knew they were going to give it to their friend at UMBC.
Right.
Then there wouldn't be.
Okay, so we basically had a choice when we did this, and one of the reasons we did do it, there were a lot of responses to the way Turnitin has done it, which is forced. It gets forced submission into the cross-institutional database. So we had a lot of feedback saying that that wasn't the best approach, and a lot of institutions would much rather have that as an opt-in basis. So that's why that's been chosen to be that way. You can certainly ask or request your students do that and submit into it. Another point I'm going to make when I show you where matches tend to come up, will actually tend to show you that because the 2 places that matches do tend to come up is firstly via your own institutional database and secondly via the web search. The other 2 sources are one is the global reference database and third is a large library database of academic resources. So the first 2 that are going to catch the bulk of matches and copies is your own institutional data and the web search.
If we ask the students to opt into it, is there some indication that we can see from the result that they did or they did not?
No, I don't believe there's a way of doing that. It really has been set up as a student opt-in tool because of the feedback we got from institutions around this. Okay. It was actually quite a substantial amount of feedback that seemed to be by this is interesting. This is the first group I've had come back and said to me that no, we really would want it the other way.
That's all right.
So, which is good feedback for us to hear.
We feel that it has to be the other way, but we're seeing some possible positive benefits.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's just in the interest of time. I'm going to keep jumping on. Come back to some of these questions if you don't feel I'm getting to them. It's as long as someone's got one of the different versions of the enterprise license, they're fine. They can use this. It's a free download, available for admins behind the Blackboard. Now ships with the newer versions, but you can go and grab it. It is free. And here's what it checks against. Your institutional database, everything that's been previously submitted by anyone at your institution, and that can include you also collecting up previous submissions from previous semesters into zipping them all together into no more than 10 meg at a time, and just doing it at what's called direct submit, is uploading those straight into the database. All right. As long as you don't do a plagiarism check on those while you're submitting them, you can put things that large in, up to 10 meg. If you try and put that in, if you try and check while you're submitting them as well, you're going to run into possible issues simply because if you're loading up things that big around timeouts in browsers. The internet source, we use a web search engine called Microsoft Windows Live, which resides at www.live.com. So something, if it's going to catch that via a web search, that article has to be found at that address. All right. Now, Google and Microsoft, any 2 search engines you want to compare, and obviously Google is the one that people do tend to use very heavily, they are not identical. There are some things that will appear in Google, or they'll appear in Google on a particular day when a particular search is done, that may not appear on that exact same day in Windows Live. They may appear in Windows Live a day later, because the indexing policies are slightly different between different search engines, but they're not exact and precise matches. So sometimes what you'll find is, hey, this was on the internet and it didn't catch it. And the first check is, put over whatever that string is into Windows Live. 99.9 times out of 10, it's not going to be there. If there's a time delay in between which somebody did that and you go and check it and it is there, it's either due to that time delay, but at that point you should really tell Blackboard about that. We get very few of these happening, but occasionally we do. Providing you tell us the URL that document exists at, the string that you put into Windows Live, and the paper ID of the submission that was done in SafeAssign that failed to catch that, we can track back and look at those and find out what's gone on. But 9.9 times out of 10, you're going to find it just hasn't been. It either is a source that is not indexed by Windows Live, or it wasn't in Windows Live at the time that search was done. ProQuest ABI informed database is 2.5 million articles. I think it's 1,100 and something or other journals. You really have to go talk to a librarian to get a sense of the coverage of that. It is very strong in the business area. I believe it's less strong in science, but I could be wrong about that. But again, you'll really have to check with the librarian. Your own institutional database, anything that's been submitted by anyone at your institution previously, and the cross-institutional database. As I said, it's the internet search and the SafeAssign institutional database where the bulk of matches do tend to come. So very briefly, just to show what it looks like in terms of you're creating an assignment, you've got this drop-down tool that's SafeAssign. Then here's the same thing on Vista CE. What the students tend to get, this is Vista? No, it's CE. The students get something like this, where it's got a little green check mark, a statement that you put in that says, please do so-and-so. This is basically your instructor statement about what you want students to do. And then they click on this View Complete button, and they get to submit. Same thing in Vista. So what they tend to get is a form like this, which is very much like the sort of assignment tool. Fundamentally, two sets of instructions up here. Firstly is a release statement, the first paragraph that's set by the administrator at the institutional level. That's some sort of policy, whatever your policy is around and plagiarism, or whatever you want to tell students to make sure all students know when they see this tool, that's what you put in there. It's a paragraph of text you can put in. The second paragraph is one the instructor puts on when they actually create the assignment. So you're able to say, write a letter to policymakers on why they should put a certain policy in place, et cetera, whatever it is you want students to do. And then basically students go in and attach a file, key thing. One file type we do not yet support, but which we are working on, and I'm confident we'll have it by this fall, but we're not there yet, is support for Office 2007 docx, which is the new file type that Microsoft introduced with 2007. If they save it as a doc in Office 2007, you're fine. It's just this new docx default file type we don't yet support. Otherwise, PDFs, RTF, text, HTML, all fine. So what happens is, let's just actually look at this in a little bit more detail. What you get is when you actually go and create a safe assignment as an instructor, you get these options of setting draft, student viewable, and urgent checking. The last one really doesn't do an awful lot. All it does is changes your order in the queue. It won't make much difference in terms of the return time of processing papers, so feel free to check whichever one you want. You've then got the choice of draft and student viewable. Now, when you say draft, that is not checked into the institutional database. That's the one case where things are not checked in. So typically what you would do, the reason you would do this is to really get students to go check their own work, clean it up before they give it to you to save work for you. So what if, for example, if you checked on draft and you checked on student viewable, students would get to submit their paper and they would get to see the report that got generated from that. Yes, you do see it as well, but you're creating you're creating a draft safe assignment and a sort of production safe assignment. Yes, they do have to be two separate ones. So the assignment is either draft or a production. Now, one thing to remember, as I said, it's not checked in the institutional database. Nothing will ever be matched against that because it wasn't checked in. So the assumption is that the student is checking in the final one. In other words, you are creating a production one, a non-draft version of this as well, in which case that is checked in. All right. But that's the reason why you'd use the draft. Really, it's to sort of get students to do the work, clean things up, reduce the amount of work that you're going to have to do. There's the global reference database statement that basically the user has to check when they actually submit. It's quite a high proportion of the students that actually do check in. It's quite amazing. Now we also have this tool, what's called Direct Submit. This is in Vista C, but it's very similar in academic. So basically you get the choice to, this is how if you want to do bulk uploads before your course starts or the first time you use SafeAssign, you can preload with anything that you have, you've already got saved as assignments. It can be up to 10 meg at a time. Just don't, there's a button when you click on the Direct Submit for skip plagiarism checking. Just check that. It'll ensure that a very large file will upload smoothly. Now what you get back is an Originality Report. I know this is very blurry, but I'm going to go through each section. So it's got this summary section, the suspected sources, and the translated text that's being converted from whatever the file format that was submitted into just plain text down here. So let's have a look at this. There's the summary section, and you're getting a couple things. This is the paper ID. So if you ever have questions about something that's not working right for you on a particular paper, that's the piece of information we need to know about to be able to track back for you. Now you'll get a number between 0 and 100. I would suggest you focus on what it is that's matching and the nature of the matches. 0 is quite clear, there's no matches. 100%, the whole thing matches. But it really gets into a sort of judgment call saying is 20% different from 25% or 30% different from 35%. I would suggest you use that in a very crude, big, holistic sort of way and look at big jumps and differences. 0, 40, 60, 80, 100. I think you need to be in one of those. I wouldn't get into looking at anything less than 20%. Then what you get, the next section is you get the particular matches that it's found. As I hold a mouse over each of these, it'll highlight in the text below what that. So there's the source, and there's the text out of the original submission that matches with that. If I click on the little hourglass here on the end, I can turn that on, so it'll actually lock on that color. And I can scroll down, have a look through all these, drag a mouse over and see which ones match. Now, because it's a matching service, it's going to match things that are correctly cited as well as things that are not correctly cited. Okay, so a quote is going to match the same way as something that was a quote, but there's nothing in the text that tells you it's a quote. So what you can go down as you hold a mouse over these, go, okay, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, but this last one here is a problem. So you can check these off, reprocess the paper, and you're left with a paper that's just got this one match. So if you want to be able to have something to print off to go discuss with the student or to do something more formal in terms of your institutional policies around that, that's what you'd do. You'd remove all the stuff that was extraneous and just be left with the one that's the key issue. So again, once I'm holding that mouse at the top, here's what I get. It's showing me the text that's actually highlighted, the text in question, and it'll show me the source it comes from and the uploaded manuscript. So you get to see sort of how close the things are at a visual level and go, yep, in that case, that's pretty much, that's an identical match. But in many cases, it isn't going to be. All right, it might be. It'll match on about 3 words in general is how the algorithm works. Anything less than 3, it won't match on. It's usually looking for strings of at least 3 words. You can also print off originality reports that are sort of meet accessibility guidelines. So that's what this is. You can print off a web accessible version of that. Gradebook integration. So if you're looking at things from the gradebook side of things, here's what you'll see. You've got the student's name, the original file they submitted, whatever that file format was, the text conversion, a little matching summary number, the safe assignment report, and the time it's submitted. So when it very first gets submitted, the essay report line the matching in the essay report will be blank. So once the paper is processed and comes back to you, those things will fill in. And typically, it'll take in the range of 5 to 10 minutes for that to get generated. In some cases, it's going to happen in less time than that. In some cases, it's going to happen in a little bit more time. But generally, after sort of 10, 15 minutes, if you're not seeing something, there may be a challenge problem. If you're not seeing it after a few hours, the most certainly is an issue that needs to be looked at. Couple very quick points, and more affect those on the admin side than anybody else. It's free, so we really do encourage you to put it on a test server and try it out. There's all sorts of questions and scenarios people will have. You'll want to see if certain things match. Whatever it is those scenarios are, do try them out. We encourage you to do that. If you've had to on campus, you're going to have less challenge because people are used to the idea of anti-plagiarism software. In schools that haven't had anything before, it is a bit of a culture shock. And it's really about people getting used to these tools the first time faculty, students. Really, it's about everybody getting used to them. So that's some of the challenges that tend to come out. A couple of points around registration. You have these registration things with Scholar, or was it Safe Assign?
Safe Assign was what the
Safe Assign, okay.
It's
Yeah.
it's been working since we got it set up, and
Okay.
since the beginning of the semester, we've been fine.
Okay, you're probably fine.
And it's available now.
All right.
Turned in, actually, both of them are turned on.
Okay. I made the point around drafts not checked in. 5 to 10 minutes to leave at least for essay reports. Word 2000 docx isn't supported. There actually isn't a block on file size. We may implement one at some point. Generally, files should be less than 2 meg. That's the general expert. The real reason a file is going to bloat a lot higher than that is because someone stuck a lot of images in it. Typically, that's bitmap images that tend to cause large files. We've had somebody stick a 50 or 60 meg, somewhere in the, something approaching 60 meg in there. The server really was not happy. So we actually may implement a formal block at some point in time. I'll skip registration issues because they're some of the things you may see. Those who are in a support function, you're going to see 1 of 4 sets of issues. Firstly, you'll see issues once you start getting error message on the screen. That's virtually always pointing to the fact that the thing hasn't registered properly in the first place. Simple test is actually once you do register any server, go actually try a submission. If it works for you, it's probably going to work fine for everybody else. If you get an issue that's happening in a course, there's a syncing function, particularly where a course is copied. Basically, you resync a course to remove all the old course IDs and replace it with the new course IDs. If there was any sort of outage between you and us at any point in time and some activity was happening, that can also cause some small errors. And there's a little resync button inside of Safe Assign, inside of the course. Clicking on that is the first time anyone has a problem in a course that doesn't need to be happening in any of the course, just click on that button. It'll solve 90% of those problems. If you've got one individual having a problem, typically it's to do with browser cookies. What happens with Safe Assign is normally pages, most web browsers are expecting to see cookies only returned to them from the exact page they're looking at. Safe Assign expects to be able to send a cookie from another page on our site that is not the exact one you're looking at. Typical way you can detect this really quickly is get someone to try the same thing in another browser. If it works fine in that browser, usually it's the cookie restrictions are slightly tight in the first browser. So you can either loosen those cookie restrictions or the individual can use the other browser if they're not too fussed about which browser they use. If you're not finding matches in papers, generally it's because it's an internet-based source, and that internet-based source is not being caught by www.live.com at the point in time where the paper was submitted. All right. If it's still not being caught when you actually go check it, we want to know about that. So it's the original URL, the paper ID, and whatever the sentence you pasted in live.com to check. So that's really what I've got, I think, in terms of, the only point was to make sources. I've sort of covered this already. You've understood why a source is not caught because it's not in the engine in www.live.com. And again, I made the point already about it's really to do with matches, not numbers. I would really suggest you focus on those matches and the meaningfulness of those matches, than you focus on any numbers at the top of the report. And generally, we will exclude really trivial matches, but we will also catch correct citations. That's the other reason why. This really is a tool to provide you information for you to make judgments about. It's really not trying to supplant faculty judgment in any way. Let's skip that. So that, again, there's some information sources. The site www.safeassign.com. We have a wiki there. When you download, there's an install guide, there's an admin guide. There's a fair bit of information. And bottom of the line, if you can't find the answer, you can email the Beyond team, which is me and a small group of other people. So that's what I've got at Safe Assign. Any questions that you feel I haven't answered with Safe Assign?
I ask our people, so it'll work for us, like turning in is already up for us on Blackboard.
And Safe Assign is as well.
So we just go into our course and we can set up an assignment.
And you go to the drop-down box, select on the right-hand side, and they'll both be in there. Okay. So you can try it out. If you want to try the new one out versus turn it in, and start building the database basically.
Yeah.
So they are.
And the point you decide to commit to it, take your previous semester papers and dump them in there using the direct submit button. So try it out first.
Yeah, this semester.
Are we going to
Alrighty.
keep both of them, or are we going to eventually get rid of one?
Well,
I mean, that's a question of cost at this point.
I think we'll have turn it in at least until.
Probably until next summer.
Okay,
So we'll probably go through a year transition
something like that.
But the idea is to eventually.
to get,
I
yeah.
think so, yeah. I think that's pretty safe to say, yes.
So that's a good idea.
Thank you so much. I have to teach. So
Very welcome. Go teach. Have fun. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
All righty, thank you, John.
Welcome.
I have a question.
Sure.